I loved to write as a child. I mean, my favourite thing at school was writing essays. Quite often I would ghostwrite essays for other kids in the class and they would do my math. So I'm one of these typical people where I'm very good at the kind of English language but not so good on math. So I think I've always been a writer. It's the way I make sense of the world, is to write it, to write my thoughts down. So yeah, I believe I've always been a writer, and I always wrote stories as a child. I went into journalism because I loved writing and felt a little bit constrained, I suppose, by news journalism. So I drifted more into feature writing, magazine writing, and longer form journalism, which I still love, and I don't regret one moment of that sort of foundation of my writing career. But there came a point where I just wanted to expand into a more creative area of writing where I could make stuff up, because as a journalist you make stuff up and you get sued, so it's not a good thing to do as a journalist. But I just wanted to create characters and create worlds just out of my head, and that's what I love about writing. I took some time out of my journalism career some years ago now, and I did a creative writing course, and that sort of gave me the opportunity, I suppose, to free range in my mind and push the boundaries of my writing, and I haven't stopped writing creatively since then.
Did the course allow you or give you a framework within how to corral your ideas into different formats? Or?
Yes, I think it did. I think it gave me permission as quite a constrained technical writer to just enter more of a sort of stream of consciousness type of writing, and to explore the creativity of writing. And then there's lots of things you learn along the way about the need for describing detail, describing smells, the sensual aspects of story. And then I think I mentioned recently the show don't tell, where you allow the action and the dialogue to move the story along. So I'm not a fan of long narrative passages. I just let the story tell itself. I think I'm quite a visual person, and often when I'm writing I see the story unfolding in my head much like a movie, and I just write what I see.
Formatics, should you get too hung up about that and said, well, I'll come back and do that in the second draft? Just get the idea down?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot to be said for that. Just write and write. Don't keep censoring yourself in your mind or on the page. You can go back and correct the punctuation and correct the spelling, because that's actually really important. I judged a short story competition recently for school children, sort of in quite a wide age range. There was one story that was very, very good, but there were about 7 or 8 spelling mistakes, which kind of let it down, and I had to mark the points down on that. So it really is important to finesse your writing, but just to letting your mind wander and enjoying the creativity of putting your story down on a page without interruption, I think is a good way to start.
Often a writer's studio or a writer's desk is portrayed with, beside it is a waste paper basket just full of paper, going right up to the roof. Is that the idea? You should throw your drafts away, or should you keep them?
I think it's different for everybody, but thankfully with modern technology, of course, you've got the delete button. You don't need to worry too much about the waste paper basket. You have days where you write sentences, delete them, write paragraphs, delete them, write pages, delete them. Other days where it kind of flows. For me, early in the morning, sitting there quite early before the house wakes up and the birds wake up, I find it's my most productive time. My biorhythms seem to be in the right, sphere, and I can write quite fluidly. Other times of the day, I'll be deleting all over the show, but I think it's different for everybody. Some people are planners, some people are more free range. It's finding what works for you, really. But for young writers starting out, I think planning is quite important. Know your story, know how it starts, know where your climax is in the middle somewhere, and how you're going to end it. I know as a young writer myself, I was great at writing stories, but I never knew how to end them, and so I got fed up with them in the end, and I probably never finished them because I could never bring them down.
brings me to that point, well, this point. Should you know the end before you start writing the story, or does it not matter? You just have an idea and explore it?
Yes, a good story has an arc, so
Yep.
it does have a beginning, and it does have a defined middle, or where things climax, and then an end. That is a good story with an arc. But you don't necessarily have to know the end in detail, but just some idea. I find that my characters surprise me. I think they're going to do something, and they do something quite different. So one of the wonderful things about being a writer is that sometimes things happen in your head and you record them that you didn't even know were going to happen. And some of my endings have come to me that way. I've had a general idea, but then the characters take over, surprise me.
So, in that inventive phase, have you ever had a character who you dropped out of one story, but they were they haunted you, so they then drove a new story?
So yes, I think with my Viola Vincent reporting series is very much like that, and that combines my love of journalism and the importance of investigative journalism with creative writing. And so Caitlin, she's 13, she wants to save the world, she's very determined. When I'm not writing her, she's often in my head, and she is looking for injustices or scams or scandals to get her teeth stuck into, and I can feel her hammering on my skull as we speak, and to get another story down on the page. So she is a character that very much demands another story be written.
So would you find, like, for example, you're sitting at the airport in a terminal and you see an incident, has that sparked stuff off for you? Or you've seen a character and you've written down there how they looked or how they spoke? Well,
of course, writers are terrible thieves. We steal pieces of dialogue, we steal ideas, we're great observers of the world. And so, yes, ideas can be sparked by the most, mundane things. And I have a diary or a notebook, and I just note some things down in there. I have about 5 ideas for another book, or several more books with that character, just sparked by everyday things. Being a journalist, I find sort of current events often spark an idea, and I'm a great consumer of news, and I often think, well, how would that appear to my character? How would she deal with that? What if that happened to her family? And knowing her as I do now, I have a pretty good idea of how she would react to a certain situation. So I think you're writing in your head long before you actually go to the word processor.
Yeah. So does the book start off with a short story, or would you see short story and writing, for example, a novel as kind of like 2 different practices or skills?
I think very different skills. Writing a short story is a real discipline because you've got to have the story unfold and resolve in quite a short space. Yeah. Funnily enough, the competition that I just judged was a very short story, and I could see how difficult it was for the young writers to actually deliver a fully formed short story. Quite often the pieces felt like the first chapter, very promising first chapters of a longer story, but 1 or 2 were able in a very short space to open a story, give an expectation and resolve it, and I think that is the issue with a short story. You really do need to have that story arc to leave the reader with a satisfied finish at the end of the story. Our book is very, very different. You're building. So, yeah, very different disciplines.
So is that formula that you've just spoken of, opening, expectation, and then the resolution, is that something you'd recommend to the writers of the competition we're talking about here?
I think, as I mentioned before, I think the most important thing is to plan your story. Get an idea down on paper about how your story might unfold. That can be the hardest part of writing a story, is deciding who your characters are and how the story is going to develop. A good idea, of course, is, foundation block. A good idea is one thing, but ensuring that idea develops in all its colour and detail on the page. I would recommend for anybody starting a story just to think away from the word processor for a wee while, or from the page, and maybe flesh out their characters a little bit. Who are the characters? What do they like? What colour is their hair? do they have a mum and dad, or are they with a single parent? You know, just some sort of idea of this person that's going to drive your story along. So yes, I'm a planner, and I always recommend planning in terms of, you know, just delivering a story that has a structure, which I think is always important.
What is it that you've read or seen that moment of inspiration that you've carried on with you and for your career as a writer? So is this something that you, like a Catherine Mansfield thing you may have read, or?
I've always, I loved as a child reading Gerald Durrell. I just love his exploration of character and his humorous way of writing. I like to think that my writing is quite humorous. It tackles quite, you know, quite meaty subjects at times, but I love the humour in Gerald Durrell's work. It was one author that I really enjoyed as a child. But I also enjoyed books about animals, the Jack London, Black Beauty, Sewell, and books about adventures, The Incredible Journey, where there is very much a beginning, a middle and an end, and it's an odyssey, a journey. If you look at a lot of classics, there is a journey, something's at stake. You know, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, something is at stake for the character, and there is an odyssey, a journey and they will be tested along the way in achieving whatever they are out to achieve. So I like all sorts of literature, but I particularly like quite strong, plot-driven contemporary literature. And I just think reading is magical for children, and if you want to be a writer, you really need to read a lot and try different authors, see what you like, just study how they write, but also detail. Don't talk about a book, talk about the colour of the book, the writing on the book, and smells and senses. Bring those into your writing. That's something I feel very strongly about. The reader must feel the environment, smell the sea, see the textures in the sand, you know, see the foamy tops on the waves, those sorts of things. I just love that detail in writing.